If you don't have one from last week, so you just have to create your own custom scripts folder. Okay. So this is how an if statement is structured. Inside, it'll have to go inside your functions, or otherwise, like I said, it will not use that piece of code. It'll just kind of throw error messages at you, because you need the function to tell it to go. So in order to do an if statement, you do it as simple as they put it. You just put an if, and then to put inside the parentheses, that's your condition you want to be met. Otherwise, if that's conditions not met, it'll skip over whatever you have inside it and just go to the next thing. So, and in order to tell it what's inside your if statement, you use those curly braces to section it off. So in order to do that, we're going to do it as player health. If it's greater than 5, we're going to just do a debug.log to tell us and make sure it's working. Let's say player health. And I don't think I went over this last week because I believe we did strictly variables and debugging variables. But a lot of the times you can just put in parentheses something you want your log to say to print to make sure something's working. So in order to do that, you just put it in parentheses and that'll print out exactly what you put in there. Now, which inside this code, spaces don't really matter. You can leave it unspaced, you can put space after it. I just didn't have a space after that by accident, but normally it's good practice to put in spaces and new lines just so everything's clean so that you can read it and that other people can read it as well. Sorry, which part? Okay, yeah, the double bars here, is that what your question was? That'll comment out just a single line of code, and it won't go to anything beneath it or below it, or above it, sorry. So it just comments out one thing, and I use that all the time to, like up here, to tell me what each part individually does. So like, start is called before the first frame of the update, they put that in there. The one I have above the player character tells me player first vowel, and that's what it'll print out, or what the variable is for. Okay? So now, if we go back, and let's go back to our cube we made with the player health on it. That's right, we made it private, so we have to go back and change that to public so we can actually see it from the editor and play around with it. Now, if we go back to our game view, click on it to get our stuff to the file. How you running over there, Neil?
What's that?
Everything working over there?
No, I don't have any of the code in here yet. So
Okay.
I just wanted to see it's like,
Got it. So all we'll need is a public integer for our player's health. So bring back my code back up here. So now also if you go back and hit play and your player's health is over 5, now you should get that debug log statement that you wrote in. So all we'll need here for our variable is our public player health. And yep. Yeah, if you just hit clear on that, for some reason the import is weird. Yep. And then the only part need after the player's health is your if statement inside your start function. Now, have you guys worked with or played around with standard assets and all yet? A little bit. Have you? Alright. So it's pretty simple to use because it's pretty much plug and play type stuff. Have you tried using different animations? In one of the other classes, or have you gotten it to work inside Unity? You have? Okay. And through code, like if you press a button, the animation will play. Let's see. Have they gone over light probes and lighting? Through the editor. Well, like baking in the lighting and using the information from the textures to light your characters. Got all that, Neil?
Just gonna get that last one. Just put it in there.
The if statement? Yep. So another thing is if we do an else statement after this or finish off the if statement with an else afterwards, then that's what will happen if your condition is not met. So it's good practice to put in an else statement because it'll happen regardless if you have an else statement or not, but it's just clearer to see everything and kind of debug your own stuff if you have an else statement and you can look and make sure that's all working for you. copy this statement. And paste it down here, and then just change this to is not. So if it's less right now, if you don't have anything in here, nothing will happen.
Then you said it's not great, if it's less than 5, would it still be the same? Or
Yes. Trying to think of one more time. Brain's a little off.
okay, like you put player's health is not greater than 5, so I'm just saying if you change it to is not player health is less than 5, you can still read it.
Yeah. Sorry?
You can put them in the wrong spots.
So for me, for my own coding, just to keep everything clean and concise and easy to read, you can, but I almost never keep my curly braces on the same line as a statement, just because it's better for organizational purposes. Yep.
Still getting there.
Let's see. You can delete that because that's part of a statement that has not been started. Right? Now, this one here, you don't have an end for your statement. You don't have that semicolon to tell your statement that it's done. Which a semicolon is pretty much like a period for your statement. So now, save. Might just be formatted. So hit enter after that, and sometimes Visual Studio auto formats it for you. If it doesn't do that, just go in front of it. So go here. Should be fine, it should still work. So save that, and then we'll go back into Unity. And now, let's say our player health is at 15 right now. So our statement is that if the player's health is greater than 5, should print out player's health is greater than 5. Let's see if that's what we got. Right there, we can see as soon as it starts, really small, but right there it says greater than 5. And then we go back to our editor. If you have the else statement in, and say it's 4.
What is it, Control S to save?
Yep, or Command S on Macs. It actually There we go. I just didn't save it because for some reason Visual Studio is harder to see if you saved or not yet. But now, since our if statement is not being met, then it's saying it's going to the next part, which is player's health is not greater than 5. So now, trick question. What happens if we put in 5? or a player's health. Because
It
our
won't
code
be
is-
able to do anything because it doesn't have anything to go.
Sorry, two people at once.
You need
Alright.
an else if for this one, I believe, because it needs to know when it's equal. Because it doesn't know that until it just keep going and through until it finds won't find anything.
It will work now, but which one will it print out if it is 5?
Both.
Sorry?
Probably both.
It will. Which one do you think it will print out if you put in just 5 for your player's health? Because think about it logically. Alright? Your code is telling you if player's health is greater than 5 to print out that it's greater than 5. So what happens if it's just 5?
Nothing should happen.
Well, it's not gonna be the else because it's not just 5. But if it's 5 and up, then it should turn out to be player health is greater than 5.
Right. So since it's not greater than 5, it'll move on to the next statement, even though it is 5, and go straight to that not greater than 5. Does that make sense? So coding is very literal and logical. So in order to add 5 into that part, say that's part of what you want it to be 5 or greater. It's as easy as adding in the equal sign after this. Or so that'll tell you if player's health is greater than or equal to 5, then it'll print out that first if statement. And then this can be used for stuff like characters or strings. Say you're comparing 2 letters. Say you have one thing or 2 names of something. Say one thing's named Q, and you want to make sure the thing next to it or is named Cube as well. And you say if it's equal to Cube, then it'll work. If not, it won't. Does that make sense, or do you guys want to see an example of it just to kind of go over it? Example? Okay. Yeah, I usually work better with visuals too. So anyone who doesn't have it, put in a public string variable. Right here, this part here, make sure this part's in your code so we can use it. I'm gonna hit the bathroom real quick while you guys make sure that's it.
Putting in the player name, Bob. String.
actually going to change the string to a private for now, just so we don't accidentally, or don't make it more confusing than it needs to be right now. Private, because if we go back and change it in the editor, we might run into some errors. Let's go here and do that. Do if, and then inside the parentheses goes our condition. If we named it player name. Alright. So in order to compare two strings or two characters or whatever is a readable thing, which readable is indicated by, it's kind of hard to see, but it comes up yellow as compared to everything else. So yellow means it's not really a piece of code, it's just a string that's readable. So in order to compare that, you need the operator equals equals. So that'll take our player's name variable that we made and whatever name you put as it and compare it to whatever's after. So afterwards, I put in the string Bob. So it'll look at the player name that we have and go by each line. So it'll compare the first letter, see if the first letter is the same vowel and same uppercase. Then if that's correct, go to the next one, and then the next one, and keep doing that cycle until it gets to the end, and compare to make sure that they're the exact same word. That make sense? Yes. For comparing stuff, it is case sensitive. Any questions so far? No, it's a lot of dense information, and it goes by kind of fast. So what it's doing is taking our player name variable that we made, which are player name variables up here. So it'll take this one, which is also Bob, and compare it letter for letter. Right. So if we change that name in there to Chelsea or Lee or anything like that, it'll go through its cycle and check if it's the same or not, which those aren't. So it'll just throw you into your else statement or skip the if. Command S. Play that just to make sure it works. There we go. Got it's Bob. Now that operator, the equals equals, say that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure something doesn't equal that. So say you have the name Bob, but you want everything else that isn't Bob. You want every other name in the book. To do that, instead of your equals equals, to do the opposite, you change the first equals to a exclamation point equal, and that reads out does not. So player name does not equal Bob, or if player name does not equal Bob, then debug.log and print out it's Bob. But since they're comparing and doing the same thing as the other operator does, it'll see that it's the exact same name and not do the if statement because the condition was not met.
And actually, where did they just, they're saying that's not.
Yeah. I don't know. That's how code does it. For whatever reason, it's a little confusing. But it's basically the same thing as doing your equals and writing all the stuff you want to happen in your else statement. So it's doing pretty much the exact same thing. It comes down to memory usage and how the code compiles. Using the does not operator here will use less memory and less steps to take because it doesn't have to go through all the processes of all the other options there are. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Kind of like similar to Python a little bit, like the statements.
Yeah. Like I said, all the code is foundationally like the same, how it's laid out. It's just different syntax for it. Sorry?
The explanation point is equal to saying.
Does not equal. The double equals, that's the comparing for strings. If you're using integers or floats or numbers, then it's just one equal, like normal math. If you're using words and strings and stuff like that, that's when you use the double equals. So Neil, based off the chunk of code right here, just this one, what's going to happen if we play it right now?
It's just gonna say it's Bob.
Why would it say it's Bob?
It's telling it player name equals Bob. It's Bob, right?
It would be if it was equals. That makes sense?
Yeah, what's the exclamation and equal sign?
So the exclamation mark before the equals reads does not equal.
Okay.
Equals reads does equal.
So it wouldn't print anything.
Right. It would skip over that line completely. Or that block of code in that statement.
Alright.
that make sense?
Yeah. The
So,
debug block thing just prints over here. That's all it does, right?
so that's just like in other programs like JavaScript, I believe it uses Oracle for its API. It has its own console inside of it. Visual Studio does too, but since it's dealing with Unity, it kind of prints out inside Unity, so that's why it shows up in the console in Unity. And that's where all your debug log statements come out. And like I said, it's important if you're trying to find out like positions of where your player's placing
Okay.
or where an object is, you can tell it just to print out those coordinates. So, how familiar is everyone with vectors?
Vectors? You said vectors?
Just the art? Iffy with vectors?
Iffy.
Okay. So, there are 4 types of vectors.
I was vector 3. No, that's the only one I know of. Only know
So,
3.
One, think about it as dimensions. Alright? So vectors is basically one dimension would just be or vector 1 would just be a point. That's all it would be, just one point in space. No other dimensions to it, no x, y, z, anything. 2 dimensions, which is a vector 2, is just a forward and back. And that's used for like joysticks and stuff like that, calculating the space in between those 2 vectors. Let me see if I can find any example to help visualize with it.
So vectors are classified as dimensions.
Basically. Yeah. It's a whole bunch of math mumbo jumbo. Yeah. Okay. So a vector 2 would just be like this green line, just going straight forward and back, and you have just one axis you're following. A vector 3 is 3 dimensions, so you have to calculate or be able to calculate the first where it is on the x, then where it is on the y, and then where it is on the z. Exactly. And then you can use vectors in programming to manipulate where exactly in space your object is. And that's where the transforms on your Unity object come in. Now there's also, when you get into vector 4s, that's for scale. So it's weird, it kind of goes in that direction. It goes first positioning and then scale. But the 4th vector, if you ever run into that, is for how big or how small it's going to be. If your 4th vector is 0.5, it's going to be half the size. If it's 1, it's going to be its normal size. If it's 2, it's going to be double the size. Alright? Now, let's use a little bit of that in code real quick. So, trying to think of how to, I'll just write it out and explain it. Transform, translate, vector 3, okay. So, this is a little intimidating right now because it's a lot of stuff you probably haven't played around with. So, transform takes your object in the hierarchy. So we'll go back to the email, show you that. So transform is taking it's almost like it's weird. I don't know why they do it this way. But transform's actually not that transform. It's not the positioning. But transform means the entire object as like a parent almost. So it'll take that entire object, and now translate means to move. So you're telling that object to move, and then in order to tell your object where to move, you need to right. So in order to tell it to move, you need to tell it a vector, which we're using all 3 dimensions, so we can go forward, or forward, back, up, down, and left or right. And depending on which way you want it to go, it'll move that way. And if you put it in the start function, it'll do it once, and then it will stop moving. So you won't even really see it, but if you put it in the update, it'll continuously move forward, and it will not stop. So let's make sure that part works real quick. Cube should move forward. Can't see it from this angle. Take it off, maximize on play. Not have saved it. Oh, and it's gone. So there it goes, moving forward. And it'll just move continuously forever.
Can you go back to the script?
Yes.
Just press run or what?
Yep.
Ready to play button?
Yep. Let me see. So, then you hit save again. Does that? Yeah. Does that seem to be my problem? So hit play. Yeah. Try to hit play.
Over here.
No, in Unity.
Oh.
So stop that code real quick, because you might. Did you put the script on here? So press
Goodbye,
W.
Cube.
So you doesn't look like your script is on here.
It has no borders to keep it from flying away.
So you can just drag and drop it into the scene. And hit play. And there it goes.
Just trying to make something. So vector 1 C is
Yes.
vector 2 is 2 places forward and left.
Yes. So
Up and down.
a vector 1 will probably never be used.
Okay.
A vector 2 just goes forward and back.
So no up, just forward and back.
Right.
Okay. And then vector 3 is X, Y, and Z axis.
Mm-hmm. So a vector 2 can go up and down, but it would only go up and down. So if it's going just up and down, it won't go right or left, and it won't go forward or back.
Right, it's just the 2 directions.
Exactly.
Okay, so it can't go, it's just between like north, south, or east, west.
Right. Okay. So now, say you don't want to use, or you want something more dynamic than just forward or back, or like you want it to move diagonally. You can either create a variable holding your vector. So this is what I did. So the code here reads out your transform, again, which is your object, dot translate, so it's telling it to move in a direction. And then we're back to a new vector 3, and now it's kind of hard to see, but you're pretty much making up which way it's going to go. So it goes x, y, z. So you're telling it x, it's going x is 0, y is 0, and then z 1. So it'll keep adding 1 to its translation every frame. Same thing if you change it to 1, 0, 0, it'll go 1 in the x, but nowhere else otherwise.
So it'll always read X, Y, Z.
Right. If you go ahead and recreate this piece of script that I have and actually hover over it, it'll tell you if you ever forget.
So there's more forward.
So does that mean that the vector?
Yes, there's no more forward. Sorry.
So does that mean that the variables of vectors, that means half the variation hold?
Yes. So every frame, this is moving forward 1 on the z-axis.
It's 0 and then 0.
Right. Now if you put 1 here, then it'll move forward 1 on the x-axis, nothing on the y, and then forward 1 on the z-axis too. Because you're declaring that as a new variable. Otherwise, if you don't declare it as a new variable, it should, if I remember all my mistakes correctly, just throw up an error message here. And if you can check to see what this says, it's saying non-invocable member vector 3 cannot be used like a method. So you need to declare it as a variable because it's thinking you're using it as its own method. So it thinks you're trying to use it like your start or update functions. Any questions so far? Because vectors can get super confusing. Alright. So now let's play around with this concept a little bit and create an if statement and tell our player health to just decrement eventually, and then if it gets low enough, translate forward. Alright? So in order to do that, we're going to have to, in this update function, take our player health equals player health minus, let's say, actually, we already have that piece of script.
Yeah, the big one.
Yep. So we actually don't even do that. So have you guys ever heard of rubber ducky coding? Okay. So what does that mean for people who haven't heard of it?
You basically troubleshoot their basic lines of code to make sure that they work. So you're doing like 100 lines of code and you see that there's errors, you don't have to go back so far. I mean, you have to set it in the console, but it's better to just do like a few at a time, troubleshoot it, and then keep going.
So you gotta remember that the computer's the stupid part. And the computer's only as smart as you are. Alright? So the name rubber ducky came from that coders would keep a rubber ducky on their desk, and if they were ever in trouble, they would explain their code to a rubber ducky. Because just saying it out loud and reading it and logically reading what's going on usually gets or helps you to realize what exactly you're doing wrong. So like these can be translated into very literal words. So we're saying if player health is less than or equal to 0, transform.translate, which is the object move, and then we're telling it to move forward on the z-axis. Right? Does that make sense? How to kind of troubleshoot that way? It's super useful in coding because you'll be coding for hours and something will just slip past you. So let's save this real quick and see if that works. Which I have nothing in take damage, so nothing's going to happen. There it goes. So the problem is the word is in there. That word right there. Yeah. You don't need that in there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's doing it like a math equation.
Okay.
Did you set up a take damage? That's at 0, so you're not taking any damage.
I think I put it in there too many times. I
Yeah.
keep dragging it over once after I save it.
Yeah, you only need to do it once, and every time you save it, it will update the one script. So you can just click on the gears there. You don't want to remove your box collider. So yeah, just remove those. Now we did put in a Boolean variable before, so we can actually, and we named it dead. So based on our script and our if statement, we can check off that Boolean as well. So let's say dead equals there we go. The wrong type of operator. So now when our player health goes to 0, it'll go forward or up in the z-axis, which I think is forward, and then check our Boolean off to be true. Now we can kind of get into an if or nested statement here. So a nested statement is an if statement within an if statement. So you're kind of checking off a line of variables to make sure they all are the same. So you're saying if one condition's true, okay, check to see if the other condition's true, check to see if the next condition's true, so you're pretty much setting up lines of checks and balances to happen. So, let me just comment this out real quick to help myself. If player L less than 0 thing. Sets fitted boolean to true.
And if it was false, it was unchecked.
It would stay unchecked. So that's kind of depends on if you have it on or off in the end. So if it's already on, then it'll do nothing because you never told the computer to turn it off. And that's where I say that just gotta remember computers are the dumb part. Like you're pretty much talking to a child and you have to be very literal with your instructions. So now let's put in inside this if statement. So we'll put another if statement in here. Let's actually copy this. So we're going to take this part and then move it down to here. Let's say if so Benjamin, right? Bernard, sorry. You want to read this out to me real quick and see if we can figure out what's going to happen through the steps. Sorry. So this whole if statement, what's going to happen down to let's say here.
If frames less than or equals to 0, it's more than 0, then it's going to play. It's going to be dead.
So if it's right, so if it's less than or equal to 0, it'll go down to dead, make that true. Then it'll go to the next piece of line. So what is that going to do?
Then I think both of that is true. But it's like check the first one and the second one is true, then it's going to move to, it's going to move forward to the next zero. X is going to be 0 and then why do we send it to?
So if player's health drops to 0, then we're gonna set boolean to 0, or the dead boolean to true. Then we check, is the dead boolean true? Yes. If it is, then we translate or move our context. So that's how nested if statements work. So we'll make sure we're saving this. Go back out. And see if that's what happens. Alright, and that's going. We can see our z keeps adding up. Now say we uncheck this, and we actually can, because it's constantly telling.
Until you change the health.
Right. So it since it's in the update, it's gonna keep going. So let's say we hit play. We'll change our take damage to 0, so our player stops taking damage. And then, but it's still going because our player's health is less than 0. So let's change that to 5, and now we see it's kind of hard to see, but on the Z, it has stopped moving. It's done doing that because it stopped hitting its condition. So let's see, we still got, yeah, about half an hour. Any questions so far?
Getting some kind of error down there, leaving something.
So hover over it, what does it say? Just hover over the red line. You don't need to click it. Stuck with code braces, so you don't have enough code braces. Just put another one after that.
Alright.
Let's see. This flag formatting is important. Let's see. So that's closed off. That's closed off. Goes into this one. There. what condition is your if statement looking for first? That's for that part. Go down to update. Scroll up. So right there.
Here.
Yep. This is what's happening. Okay, what's it checking for?
It's less than.
And it's printing out your player's health currently, so you can see how much your player's health is at. Right. So since it's not less than or equal to 0, nothing's going to happen. So go back to your script. What would be the error here? Well, there's not a literal error, but why isn't your player health going down to 0? Because you got it set to 15, which is right, but where are you telling it to be lower? So you're minusing the take damage variable. So check your variables and see if you actually have your player taking damage.
Change that.
Yep.
What do we change it
Anything. Except for a negative, then you just keep adding it. Yep. Alright. Well, that's pretty much it for this class. If you guys want, you can go. I will get Blackboard up and working by next week, so we can actually see stuff and get stuff down off there. No homework for this week. Gonna come in with an exercise next week just like this one to kind of figure out and debug yourself. Alright? For names, like, you know the game Enter the Gungeon? No. Okay. So, yes. So, it's used for stuff like databases where people have names and you have all that information dependent on their name. Like, think about the college, for example. You have your student ID, and then you have your name associated with it, and all that information. Say they just wanted to go off name basis. Then they can look up all your information just based on your name. Same thing with games like Borderlands. One of the biggest identifying things is the name of the guns, and then depending on the name of the gun will have all its associated, how much bullets it can carry, how many shots are shot. Those are the examples where it's used. Yes. The character would be for getting down to optimization. So say you've got a list of alphabetical stuff, you only want everything that starts with the letter A. So that's where the character comes into play. Right. Now, we'll get into tags later, which you can actually name your player a tag or name an enemy a tag, and then everything tagged enemy will has it.
Yeah, that was one thing I couldn't like, I couldn't, get out of my head. What was the type of situation you would use to like recognize how, when you would use that?
Right. People usually use numbered IDs more often because it's less spacey to use. But when you get to a list of like hundreds of things, it's easier to do naming conventions.
What was before we did this,
Yes.
how was it laid out? So I was trying to just get something, so there's. And what comes after that?
So you're going to want to declare it as a new vector.
So you want to put that just like this?
Yes.
Wait a
Otherwise,
second.
again, it's going to think you're trying to use it as a method or a function.
Not like with the commas, but like just one.
Right. So you're going to need a parentheses, and then you're also going to need another parentheses. Right.
So is there anything we have to do for next class? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just, if things are kind of, you're having a hard time grasping it, just go over it.
Alright.
Look at the code you have, stuff like that, make sure. I'll try to get on Blackboard and publish like some resources to take a look at so you can study it if you need to, because this stuff is kind of memorization.
Alright.
Like the rules and stuff like that. So I'll try to get links and stuff like that out to you guys as resources. And I'll also get on Blackboard and post up my script I have so far, so you can pull it down and not have to kind of type everything up by hand. Right. So let's see. For vector 4, so you're going to need all 4 vectors of x. So you're gonna need x. Yes. Yes. Right. So the comma will break up your x, y, and z and scale.
Some of the things I must do.
Don't get me started.
I went to go send an email. It was like, I thought it was logged into my account. I was logged into somebody else's account.
Yeah.
Alright. See you next week.
See ya.
Yeah.
Any questions, Bernard? You know, it's kind of a lot harder coming in second.
A lot of questions.
All right. One second, let me just get fast real quick. Just so that's not the only thing I'm thinking about.
No problem.
other questions? Right. That's fine. It's actually, see in your project, you actually have the standard assets folder in there. And then if you or open that up, unfurl it, just hit the arrow next to it. Now you have all these assets you can go through and use for game creation. Yep. As long as you have Unity. Yes. I believe most computers already come with Visual Studio. If not, or are you running on just mainly Linux OS?
Yeah.
Okay, then you should be fine. Should already come with Visual Studio pre-programmed on there. So as soon as you download Unity, you should be good to go. And you might want to make sure you download the Unity Hub, because that's the one that will give you access to all the versions. Sorry? Yeah, so this is the Unity Hub here. That'll give you all your, yep. So, let's see, once you go on, just type in Google Unity Hub. Not the manual, but the first one after that. Download Unity, just download Unity. And then it'll go you through the installation process.
So I believe you must see your something about what
What do you mean?